And joining me now is St Bede's lawyer Andrew McCormick. Good evening to you.
Hi,
Set down or outline for me, if you will, the school's position.
Well, the school maintained, Chris, that they had followed a proper process. They had conducted a thorough investigation into what had happened, and that they imposed a penalty that was proportionate to the incident. The challenge that was made by the families was that the proper process wasn't followed, and that the penalty that was imposed was disproportionate.
Essentially, the penalty was you went illegally on a conveyor belt, you went through a highly restricted area at the airport, you failed the school's code of conduct, you don't get to make the rowing team, you don't get to join the regatta. That was the school's position, wasn't it?
Well, that was the description of the incident, and I think that seems to be pretty well known by now. And the school took the view that it was a reasonable response to withdraw the boys from the team and ask them to come home.
And an interesting twist, I guess, today's development doesn't necessarily mean that the High Court agreed with the boys' parents. It means it's an interim junction, meaning there could be a case to answer to on both sides.
Well, that's right. All that the High Court judge was asked to do today was to rule as to whether there's an arguable case that the school made an unlawful decision. And as I say, the families said that the investigation wasn't thorough enough and that the penalty was disproportionate, to really sum that up. So, hence, an unlawful decision. And Her Honour Justice Dunningham said, there's an argument there, let's have that argument on another day. So in the meantime, she granted the interim injunction, which allowed the boys to row, and the school abides by that.
Now that's interesting, because that does not necessarily mean that the High Court agrees with the boys' parents. It means there's something here to look at. In the meantime, I'll throw you a bone, yep, go into your rowing, what have you, we need to look at this again later.
Well, the judge was at pains to explain that she wasn't looking at the merits of the decision, she wasn't drilling down into the school's decision at all, and she wasn't asked to do that by the family. The point of the application for the interim injunction was to determine whether there was an argument there that potentially the decision was unlawful, and she said there is an argument, and then we...
So what are you representing the school, what are you arguing then? You're saying the punishment fits the so-called crime? Well,
that's the school's position. They say that this all happened very quickly on Friday. They talked to the people that they could. They received information from people on the ground in Auckland, and in consultation with members of the senior management team, and after speaking to the parents, they made the decision to withdraw them from the team. Not to stand them down or suspend them, but just to say, you're out of the team, come home. And
an interesting twist today, one of the boys' parents, the father, who was also the chairman of the rowing club, I understand, he's now stood himself down from the club. What do you make of that?
Well, I think that's probably an entirely appropriate decision for him to make, because? Well, it was one of his son was one of the boys in question, so he probably felt it was a conflict for him to remain in the chair of the rowing club, and I think that's the right thing to do.
Let me ask you a question and put it this way. If you've got kids and your boys misbehave, they break aviation security and the highest way, and that is going through a restricted area, what would you say to them? Would you say the school did the right thing, little Johnny, learn from your mistakes, or would you say, OK, that's unfair, let's go to the High Court?
Well, I think that's a subjective issue, Chris. And the school is quite accepting of the fact that this action was open to the families. They don't begrudge the families one bit for taking this action. So there's no issue there. And it's an available option, and if you can do it, then it's open to you.
The boys and their lawyer put out a statement today suggesting it was not about the punishment, it was simply about the fact that they wanted to be in this rowing club. But the whole thing was about the punishment, because that's the whole point. They want to be in this rowing club. The school said no. So aren't they being a little bit disingenuous, putting out a statement today saying, oh, you know, we're not arguing that we did wrong, we're arguing the punishment?
It might be a question for them, in fairness.
What are the wider ramifications of this? And I talk about the fact that we had the case in Auckland of the schoolboy that refused to cut his hair because a new principal comes in and says, cut your hair, mate, you look good, you're a disgrace, cut it, have some boundaries. The parents run off to the High Court. The High Court says, yep, no problems. Do you worry that we're seeing more and more cases where parents are saying, no, this is not going to happen, we're off to the High Court?
Well, maybe statistics might suggest that, Chris, but again, I think it's a subjective thing. Not all people would take that view, and not all people would have the resources to do what has been done. But that doesn't diminish or detract from a person's ability to challenge a decision. That's a right that's enshrined and it's open. And as I say, the school does not begrudge these people at all.
So finally, where to from here? This is only an interim discussion, so there'll be potentially another court hearing. What do you know?
The school really has to make a decision about whether it wants a substantive hearing of the argument whether the decision was unlawful or not.
And if it does, what happens then?
Well, a timetable will be set in conjunction with the family's lawyer and the court about hearing time and filing of evidence and that sort of thing, moving the case through the system.
And that could be a hearing that could take half a day, I imagine.
Oh,
Possibly.
at least I would imagine, yeah.
Bede's lawyer Andrew McCormick, thanks so much for coming into CTV News.
No
Really
problem.
appreciate your time tonight.